Wow, gosh, who feels the heaviness lately of everything that's going on? So much uncertainty, so much unknown. And for those in the US in particular, combined with the virus is so many underlying issues around division and separation, with government and with racism and with homophobia. And for me, it very much feels like a boiling pot that has been boiling for some time. And the virus is really just turning up the heat in many ways. So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Seth Speaks, which is a book by Jane Roberts. It was a channeled work from the 70s. And this is another one of their books, which is called The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events. And in this book, that Seth channels through to Jane, and Seth is I guess you would call a non-physical being who's lived many lives and souls. So this is a very out there subject and video for some of the people who are tuning in. This may not be something that you is a part of your world or that you're aware of or interested in, and that's okay. But for those who want to maybe broaden their horizons, open their heart and their mind and think about things from a different perspective, I think his work is amazing. And Jane starts by saying, Seth is delivering to our conscious minds our deepest unconscious knowledge about ourselves, the world and the universe and the source of being itself, which for me resonates so deeply when I've read any of Seth's work and material. I would say about 80% of it just is exactly that he is delivering to our conscious mind our deepest unconscious knowledge about ourselves, the world, the universe, humanity. And so I wanted to share, because not everybody has this book, and I was reading it obviously during this time of a pandemic just by chance, and it's around mass events. And he talks a lot about pandemics of the past. This was written back in the 70s, and yet it feels very current and real in terms of what it explains and how it describes a lot of things that are going on for us right now. So I just want to read some excerpts of it, and I'll do a post later where I'll share some screenshots of the book so that you can read through these in your own time and way. But a lot of Seth's early work is repeatedly stresses this, that you create the whole of your reality. But how do our realities merge and combine to form mass reactions such as the overthrow of governments, the birth of religion, wars, epidemics, earthquakes? And that's what this particular one focuses on. So when he talks about we create the whole of our reality, it's really that our thoughts, our feelings, manifestation, all of that kind of the law of attraction, but on a deeper spiritual level. So I highly recommend you grab a copy of Seth Speaks if you can. I don't think it's in print, so you have to get secondhand copies. But one of the things he starts in here, a person's private experience happens in the context of his psychological and biological status, and basically cannot be separated from his religious and philosophical beliefs and sentiments, and his cultural environment and political framework. So the way somebody thinks is, and what they create in their reality is intertwined with all of those beliefs and values that they've had for all of the years they've lived. I'm skipping through pieces. So some of the highlighted parts I had, he talks about only when the private nature of our reality was emphasized enough in his previous works did he feel that he could then start explaining the context of mass events. So for those who are new to this material, some of this is going to maybe not resonate as deeply as had they had the background of all the other work. But I think it's important to share. So it is true to say that each individual dies alone, for no one else can die that death. But it is also true that part of the species dies each death, and it is reborn with each birth, and that each private death takes place with the greater context of the existence of the entire species. the death serves a purpose, species-wise, while it also serves a purpose for the individual. And this is really what drove me to want to do this video, to want to share this message as I get into some of his deeper things. It's really that point that resonated so deeply with me. Like, what do all of these deaths mean, from racism with Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd coming out in the news the last couple of days, and Trayvon Martin in the US in particular, with the gun violence and wars with the virus. And so I want to go to read through some of this, and just really, my intention behind sharing this is that maybe it will open your mind to seeing this all in a different way and grabbing a copy of this. So for those just tuning in, it's Jane Roberts' Channeled Works by Seth, The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events. So for anyone who has read Seth, anyone in the comments, put your hand up if you have. So where was I up to? The death serves a purpose, species-wise, while it serves the purpose of the individual. For no death comes unbidden. An epidemic, for example, serves the purpose of each individual who's involved, while it also serves its own function in the greater species framework. When you consider epidemics to be the result of viruses and emphasize their biological stances, then it seems the solutions are very obvious. You learn the nature of each virus and develop an inoculation, which I'm assuming is the old terminology for vaccines. And you give each member of the populace a small dose so that a man's own body will combat it and he will become immune. The short-sightedness of such procedures is generally overlooked because of the definite short-term advantages. As a rule, for example, people inoculated against polio do not develop the disease. Using such procedures, tuberculosis has been largely conquered. There are great insidious variables operating, however, and these are caused primarily by the small framework in which mass epidemics are considered by us human beings. In the first place, the causes are not biological. Now, I am not stating this as fact. This is something from a Channeled Works, so do what you will with this information, but it's an interesting way to think about things. And what he shares is, in the first place, the causes are not biological. Biology is simply the carrier of a deadly intent, a deadly intention, a thought form. In the second place, there is a difference between a virus produced in the lab and that inhabiting the body, a difference recognized by the body, but not by your laboratory instruments that we have in terms of modern day medicine. So he talks about the body's chemistry being confused because it knows that it is reacting to something that is not a true disease, but a biologically counterfeit intrusion, because it's a thought form, it's a deadly intention. Now, no person becomes ill unless that illness serves a psychic or psychological reason. So those, for Simon who's just tuning in, you may want to go back and watch the whole beginning as well, because otherwise you're going to kind of not get the context of this is a Channeled Works, not facts, and it's from a more spiritual perspective too. So those individuals who have psychologically decided upon their death will die in any case, whether or not they're given the inoculation, the vaccine, or side effects. Inner reality and private experience give birth to all mass events. Man cannot disentangle himself from the natural context of his physical life. What is the relationship between the individual and the gigantic mass motion of natures of government, religion, mass conversions, mass hysteria, mass healings, mass murder, and the individual? Those are the correct questions that he devotes this book to. So he talks about, and I think this is something interesting, that, you know, how we're seeing death. We're not really even having great conversations around death at the moment, and certainly not from a spiritual perspective. Jody, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about a Channeled Works from Seth, which you may be familiar with. And so I'm just going to continue reading, and for those who want to, you can go back and play the entire video. Dying it's kind of like a book club reading. Dying is a biological necessity, not only for the individual, but to ensure the continued vitality of the species. Dying is a spiritual and psychological necessity. Inherently, each individual knows that he or she must die physically in order to survive spiritually and psychically. The self outgrows the flesh. Oh my God, that line, I got goosebumps. Like, the self outgrows the flesh. Like, what a beautiful way to think about death. To some degrees, epidemics and recognized illnesses serve the sociological purpose of providing an acceptable reason for death, a face-saving device for those who've already decided on a soul level to die. This does not mean that such individuals make a conscious decision, and then he goes on to separate suicide versus dying during an epidemic. I know, Aisha, I love that statement too. The self outgrows the flesh. It is not understood that before life, so he's talking to us humans, most of us, it is not understood by us that before life, an individual decides to live. So they're making a choice to live, and the desire for life has been most flaunted, yet human psychology has seldom dealt with the quite active desire for death. It's in its natural form. This is not morbid, frightened, neurotic, or cowardly, but a definite positive, healthy acceleration of the desire for survival, in which the individual strongly wants to leave the physical life as once the child wanted to leave the parent's home. I'm not speaking here of the desire for suicide, and he goes on to clarify that. So I want to skip ahead to a part that really resonated with me, and this is where he really focuses on what are these pandemics, epidemics, the division, the separation, all the things, overthrows of government, everything that's going on in the world, what might they mean in a bigger context? And he says, on one level, the deaths are a protest against the time in which they occur. Give me an amen. Like, how many people feel that on a deep, deep level that in many ways this has served us as a wake-up call, as a bitch slap that we needed, that there was so much going wrong that needed to be stopped, that maybe this is the way that it got our attention. And so for me, this idea that on one level the deaths are a protest against the time in which they occur really resonates. The reason, of course, vary from every individual, yet all involved want their death to serve a purpose. And when I think about George Floyd and Ormond and Trayvon and a lot of these black men that have been killed by police and violence and white supremacists, and Trump coming into power, whether you're for or against him, the division it's caused and separation, particularly in the US, that has caused. For me, this makes sense in many ways, that they as an individual were choosing on some soul level for their deaths to be a protest against the time in which they occur, and wanting their deaths to serve a purpose. Partially then, their deaths are meant to make the survivors question the conditions that they're of our time. For unconsciously the species knows there are reasons for such mass deaths that go beyond accepted beliefs. And it talks about the plagues taking rich and poor alike and the lessons that came from that on a soul level. Initially, so I'm jumping ahead again, initially there is a psychic contagion. This is that deadly thought again we spoke about earlier. And despair, for example, moves faster than a mosquito or any outward carrier of any given disease. The mental state brings about the activation of a virus, in those terms passive. Despair may seem passive only because it feels that the exterior action is hopeless, but its fire rages inwardly, and that kind of contagion can leap from bed to bed, from heart to heart, and it touches those, however, who are in the same state only. And to some extent, it brings about an acceleration in which something can indeed be done in terms of group action. Now, if you believe in one life only, then such conditions will seem pretty disastrous. And in your terms, they clearly are not pretty. Yet, though each victim is an epidemic may die, his or her own death, the death becomes part of a mass social protest. The lives of intimate survivors are shaken. And according to the extent of the epidemic, the various elements of social life itself are completely disturbed, altered, and rearranged, which we can clearly see is something that is happening by this mass lockdown globally. Sometimes such epidemics are eventually responsible for the overthrow of government and the loss of wars. There are also even deeper biological connections with the heart of nature. You are biological creatures. Your proud human consciousness rests on the vast unconscious integrity of your physical being. In that regard, your consciousness is as natural as your toe. In regard, despair or apathy is a biological enemy. So what he's really saying here is, and what I've seen a lot of people saying is that, fear can be more deadly than the virus. Now, a lot of people can contradict that and go, well, are you crazy? People are literally dying from the virus. Yes, but when we understand that we create the whole of our reality, this despair, this hopelessness, this fear is what can be a part of activating the virus, and why I believe we're seeing some places have it so much worse than other places. Places where maybe the deaths were there for a reason that maybe another city didn't need, maybe as that wake-up call. And I think that, again, you can take what you want from this, and it's a channeled work. It's not fact, it's not science, it's a spiritual writing. But for me, there is a lot of truth that resonates within this. Yes, Jody, come back and have a listen, and I'm going to post some screenshots from the book as well as a separate post for anyone wanting to read it on my wall. So the epidemics then serve many purposes, warning that certain conditions will not be tolerated. There is a biological outrage that will be continually expressed until the conditions are changed. Again, when we look at the medicine that is coming from this time, from these deaths in all these different ways, the medicine is different for New York and Lombardy and China and Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand, I've been stuck out here during this, and obviously I've been in LA for 9 years, so that is very much my home, and I feel like a US person. But being out here has helped me to be outside the fishbowl, the bubble that we're in the US, and to recognize that there's other places getting it so much more right. Week one, there was financial aid and support and access to removing Superfund, all mortgages frozen. And I look at the US and I think the division and the separation, people on the governor's steps with guns, and we're fighting for the wrong things. They're blinded to what is going on in many ways, that they are not being taken care of in the way that many other countries are being. And I think that again, why certain pockets, why certain areas, for me, this resonates deeply, that the epidemic serves a purpose, and that the individual death is protesting against the time in which they're occurring. And I can hear George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon shouting from their graves, wake up, listen, I matter, speak my name, make this stop. How many more deaths do there have to be? And I think that the virus is connected to all of that. I think in some way, shape or form, this is a medicine for society and for the world and for humanity, to get the individual lesson that each country, city, society, collective consciousness needed. And so I don't know what you all make of this and how many of you read channeled works and spiritual works, but I thought that it offers a wonderful, different perspective that moves us away from fear and terror and not being able to fix it, or being in pain around the deaths, instead of seeing that maybe those deaths serve a deeper spiritual purpose. And it is a very new way for some to be thinking about all of that. So I'm going to post some of the page excerpts if anyone who wants to reread them and check out the book, and you can go back and catch the full replay. I think this is a really important topic and an important way for people to look at things that's very different. I love you all.